Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this short audio presentation, we're going to begin the conversation on why good ideas fail. We really have two different topics we want to talk about here. The first one covers why great ideas aren't always so great and customers don't accept new products. And the second one, which will be in a separate short audio presentation, addresses why entrepreneurs tend to get this wrong and suggests some tactics that you can use to increase the probability that your product might eventually be adopted. Many entrepreneurs try to bring ideas to market that really seem like good ideas at the time. And there's many reasons that they fail. And there's just a couple of examples here which you may or may not be familiar with. Webvan was a very early venture that was trying to do grocery delivery. And obviously grocery delivery is now becoming commonplace. But back in the year 2000, it was a radical innovation, and it was ultimately entirely unsuccessful. The $1 US coin, you may not know this, but the United States is legally required to produce these every single year, even though you probably don't have a single one in your collection. Other countries have very successfully developed, and propagated these kinds of coins. The UK has a $1, a £1 coin. In fact, there are no £1 notes anymore in the UK, and Canada has a Canadian dollar coin called the loonie, no joke, which is also very prevalent. There are no Canadian $1 bills anymore. But the $1 coin in the United States has been totally unsuccessful. And then I'm not even going to get into the Cheetos flavored lip balm. But many entrepreneurs, when their innovation doesn't seem to succeed, their argument is that if only the customer was smart enough to understand my idea. And having mentored dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs, I hear that very often, where entrepreneurs say, this is just such a great idea, and I can't believe my customers aren't smart enough to figure this out. And if you find yourself saying that, then you have missed something very important, because this isn't about how smart your customers are, and it's not about how good your idea is. It's really about whether or not your idea addresses a need that customers are willing to pay for. So we're going to talk a little bit about why sometimes that doesn't quite work. And we're going to use an example to get started here. The Deca Segway, which many of you have seen, I'm sure, but realistically, I'm guessing most of you do not remember when this was first launched. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of the PR around the launch of the Deca Segway back in 2001. If you asked experts, entrepreneurs, and industry people, they had some pretty exciting things to say. Dean Kamen, obviously, who was the creator, perhaps a little bit biased when he said that this will be to the car what the car was to the horse and buggy, and if we're only making a few $1 billion at a time, we're going to be very disappointed. But you do know, of course, who Steve Jobs is, and of course you know who Amazon founder Jeff Bezos is. And they commented that the Segway was going to be as big a deal as the PC, and that Segway is going to make a mint selling to the corporate market. Now you might wonder, well, those are other entrepreneurs, but what about savvy investors? What did they say about this? Well, Deca raised $90 million from private investors. In fact, one of the most famous and well-established venture capital firms in the world, Kleiner Perkins, was an investor, and one of the lead partners at Kleiner Perkins, John Doerr, who's a recognized Silicon Valley venture capitalist expert, said maybe this is going to be bigger than the internet, and said that Segway might be the fastest company in the world to reach $1 billion in sales. What actually happened? Well, in 2004, the company was bankrupt. And a few years later, it was sold to an individual UK millionaire. And then a few years after that, it was sold yet again to a company called Ninebot, which you've probably never even heard of. So clearly, nothing like the success that some of the experts and investors anticipated. And there were a lot of reasons that Segway simply didn't accomplish what people thought it would accomplish. And I think we could probably tie specific reasons back to how it was meant to be used, whether people really felt that they needed it for the kinds of applications that the company was trying to promote it for, and in the context of general transportation and its costs, it simply didn't present a strong enough value proposition to get people to switch from using either cars or bicycles or simply walking. So the key question we might ask is, how do customers place a value on the things they buy? And what we're going to talk about here are a couple of theories about how people value the things they purchase. And it's one of the single most important parts about this is to understand that for most customers, minimizing losses is more important than getting new gains. And that might not be obvious to you, and it might not be familiar, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time in the business world or had to make business purchasing decisions. Because very often as a consumer, when you're buying something because you need it and because you don't have it. So you need a new shirt, you need to purchase toothpaste, whatever it happens to be. But at the same time, every time you do that, the odds are good that you are buying something that you have bought before. Now, once in a while, it's completely new. You know, you buy something you've never bought before in your life. But when you buy something that you've purchased before, whether it's toothpaste or whether it's a shirt, you are still comparing what you're getting against what else you have purchased in the past. So, for example, if you have used Colgate your entire life, to brush your teeth, then when you go to the store and you are for a moment considering purchasing a different brand of toothpaste, you're not considering that new toothpaste, maybe Crest, in a vacuum, as if it was the only option that you had and you were choosing between Crest or nothing. What you're really doing is comparing the new purchase against your old purchases. And unless there is a clear value towards the new purchase compared to the old purchases, you're probably just going to continue to buy what you've always bought. And so one way of thinking about this is with a theory called prospect theory, which says that people would rather avoid a loss than have a chance at a gain. And you might think, well, there's no loss here. But even in the context of the toothpaste, when you choose not to buy the brand that you've bought previously, you are taking a risk. There is a loss associated with it because it has always worked before, right? And so it is possible that Crest will be better for whatever reason, but it's very hard to know. And so as you ponder, will Crest be good enough, so much better than Colgate, that it's worth getting? In the back of your mind, you're thinking, you know what? I'm just concerned that giving up Colgate is just not going to work for me. People would rather avoid a loss than have a chance at a gain. And that prevents a lot of people and organizations from trying new products just because they're happy enough with what they have. And that brings us to a second psychological economic theory called endowment theory, which is people value what they have more than what they don't have. And that might, again, seem a little bit counterintuitive. But the point is that once you have something, you place a certain value on it, and that value then prevents you from being willing to give it up. So here was an example. Imagine college students who have no preference between, say, a mug and a chocolate bar, and they're worth roughly the same amount of money, whatever it happens to be, like they're worth $1, $1.50, or something like that. But theoretically, they're worth about the same. And so students should be indifferent between them. They'd be happy with one and equally happy with the other. But in this experiment, all of the students were given the mug. So now they all have the mug, right? And then they were offered the option to swap it for the chocolate bar. So what percent of students do you think chose to switch? How many of them gave up the mug to get the chocolate bar? From a statistics perspective, we would assume that about half of them would, right? Because they're indifferent between the two. They value them equally the same. And so, you know, context might matter depending on what they have planned to do next, or you know, just small variations in their circumstances or how they're feeling in the day. But on average, since they value them the same, you would expect that about half of the students would swap over to the chocolate bar. But the upshot was only 10% did. Only 1 out of 10. And that's because once we own something, we place a higher value on it. We don't want to give it up. And so even though theoretically the chocolate bar was just as valuable to them, the vast majority of students at that point would not switch out. you have to remember that all purchases are trade-offs. You get something, but you give up something, right? And this is why some innovations take a lot longer to be adopted than others. Electric cars being a great example, right? You get environmental friendliness. You no longer have to go to gas stations. You may be saving money in the long haul. But what you're giving up is the easy refueling associated with gas stations, right? Because if you're going to drive further than the range of the vehicle, you're probably going to find a gas station, but you might not find somewhere that you can charge the electric vehicle. And so we can look at all of these different kinds of purchases and recognize that you get something, but there is something you give up. There's a cost associated with it. And that is very often why it's so difficult to get customers to change what they currently purchase. The key trade-off elements you have to consider are time, because the cost they pay is immediate, but the benefits are in the future. Certainty, because you have to pay for it now, but it's not clear that you'll get the benefits in the long run. And quantification, that is the fact that the price is very specific. It's exactly $4.82. But the benefits may be very difficult to quantify, right? Maybe it makes you happier, it tastes better, it makes you healthier, but how valuable is that? And when it's harder to quantify something, it becomes that much harder to make the decision. This is important because it isn't enough for your idea or innovation to be better than what's already out there. You may remember this from the innovation marketplace from one of our early class sessions. Customers place a value on doing what they already do. It's this classic idea of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so as an entrepreneur, you have to convince them that the value of your idea or innovation is greater than the cost of making a change. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit about how customers make decisions. And in the second part, we're going to talk about why entrepreneurs struggle with this and some of the things that entrepreneurs can do in order to improve the probability that their idea or innovation will be successful in the market.